you. Very kind. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Some people were here earlier on, weren't they? I can see some faces from earlier. And there's some new faces. So I'll do a bit of an intro of myself for the new faces, but I'll keep it in the context of what we're going to discuss. This morning was very sport and exercise related, where I've spent a huge part of my career. And this one's really looking now at preventative health. And so really in the context of health and global health, and certainly preventative health, where my kind of background is. So I spent 6 years as a clinical physiologist, an exercise physiologist. So as I said previously, but for those who weren't there, working with people who've been diagnosed with cancer, cardiovascular disease, various pulmonary conditions, neurological, so post-stroke, and even end-of-life care, working in those areas, either as a nutritionist or as a physiologist, and looking at recovery pathways and rehabilitation. I've recently been recognised by the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland as a fellow, so I've joined their faculty for medicine and sports medicine. And I've worked a lot with global strategies, health innovations, cities changing diabetes, which are all very much about how we raise the debate and look at the social agenda with regards to health parity, and how we get people to actually, and this is where it really falls into the full context of this afternoon's talk, how we get people to take responsibility and own their own health. How we empower people to make better choices so that they can function more in a preventative capacity, so that they can avoid the majority of what we call the lifestyle conditions. And typically they are associated with or related to those non-communicable diseases. So before I go into any of this, it's really important that I make something clear from the start. I am very, very in favor of the medical model. But the medical model has been overwhelmed over the past 30 or 40 years. And the reason why the medical model, which is that something happens, you are assessed, diagnosed and treated, that's the medical model. We call it a health system, but really it's a sickness system, because you go there when you either suspect or you know you are dealing with a level of sickness. This is the medical model, mechanistic medicine. It is life-saving. It is transformative. It is miraculous. It's developed so much over the past 50 years, and actually it stands today on the threshold of advancing even more, as it's starting to understand more factors that relate to the gut. There are huge advances in specific types of targeted therapies. And then when we start to look at the various aspects of STEM and STEM research that's happening around the world, we are very likely to see huge transformations in the mechanistic model of medicine and how that works. The problem we have, and this is a problem on a global scale that was brought home to everybody who was not already aware during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that far too many people who don't need to be or should not be sick, who are dealing with chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases, are. To such an extent, it's become the new normal. It is so common. When you look at the statistics around the change in our health as nation states, it is out of context with how we have advanced and developed scientifically and medically. Never before have we known so much, and never before has our communities and our societies been besieged by illness and preventable conditions. And so I myself was a part, back in the UK, we have something called the NHS, which is the National Health Service, which is the entire network of hospitals, localized doctors, community care, that looks after the entire society, the entire population. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I was brought in as a part of the strategy team to figure out how are we going to get out of this situation. What is it we need to have in place to help people to recover, those who are dealing with post-COVID syndrome and even just post-COVID? And what is it we need to do as we move forward to change this situation? Because let's be clear, and this is not sensational, the world did not go into lockdown because of a virus. The world went into lockdown because too many people were vulnerable to a virus that couldn't be contained. That's the reality. Too many people with what we call comorbidities. So this brings us right the way back round to preventative health, which is that investment that we all need to make. But more than that, because I'm aware of the fact that there are health practitioners in the room, it's not just the investment we make on ourselves, the choices we make in order to manage and maintain our own best health. It's the message we convey to other people. It's the advice and the guidelines that we give to other people. As somebody who's worked with, and I have several, countless in fact, medical colleagues, and someone who's worked within the medical space, 10 years ago, when you started to have a conversation and discuss the agenda around preventative health, it was dismissed. It was this notion of waste of time. All we'll do is, as people get sick, we'll treat them and we'll manage the situation. And then they realized that when it all goes the wrong way, they can't cope. And health systems around the world buckled. They couldn't cope with the pandemic. And then the medical people, my colleagues and myself included, started to say, let's talk about preventative health again. We need to get people to be better empowered, to make better choices, to live healthier lives and prevent the preventable. The problem is too many people don't realize what they can measurably reduce the risk of and what's preventable. And the reason why they think that way goes back to a statement I made a moment ago, which is that sickness, illness, poor health is so common, we now make the mistake of thinking it's normal, and it's not. And so we need to reverse the statistics. We need to get people to take responsibility for their own health. So, I am going to attempt to talk you through a lot of that. And it's all in the context of diet. Because, and you'll have to tell me, there is a well-established saying back in the UK and Ireland, where I'm from, which is, you are what you eat. Is that a phrase over here? Yeah? It's true. It's true. And it was actually the first recorded incidence of that being stated is over 2,000 years old, which is, let thy food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food. You are what you eat. And so the outcome of your health, your wellness, is highly correlated with the food choices you make. And our food has undergone a systematic change in the past 80 years. The industrialization of food has brought with it catastrophic outcomes, which we are only now really catching up with on the evidence on. In recent times, I've been really proud to say what I'm about to say now, because it took a long time for us to be able to say it. For a while, people said it was conspiracy theory, and for a while, people said you can't say that because we don't know, but actually we do. We have consensus on it. The research now is so compelling it can't be ignored. But the fact is that ultra-processed food leads to sickness. And it is correlated with all of the known non-communicable diseases. The increased prevalence of ultra-processed food in your diet directly correlates with the increased risk of you developing a non-communicable disease. And no matter how many billions of dollars a corporation makes, their marketing can't dismiss that fact. It's a fact. 5 years ago, if I'd said that, someone would go, well, you can't say that, we don't know, it's scaremongering. Today, as we say that, we know it. It's consensus. It's writ large. It's all over the research. It's a fact. And so we need to change what we eat. We need to make better food choices. But really what I'm going to take you through over the next duration of this talk is some of the context as to where that fits and the changes that I think you need to make. But I think also we need a different mindset. We live in the 21st century. We have 8 billion people living on this planet. 100 years ago, we only had 2 billion. As people are living longer, we've got an aging global population. We need to take that really, really seriously. And we are actually reached a point now where we've reached some quite severe points that we need to consider. First of all, in certain parts of the world, the US, certainly in the UK and other parts of mainland Europe, we are now at the point where the generation that is up and coming, aged between 1 and 10, has a predictive shorter life expectancy than their parents. This is catastrophic. We are now at the point at which the people who are coming up beneath us are less likely to be around as long as us. That tells us something that we need to pay attention to. Secondly, if we look at the US, and the US is a good indicator for dietary shifts across mainland Europe and the Scandics and the Baltics, 7 to 8% of North Americans now have what we class to be good metabolic health. So 90 to 93% are in poor metabolic health. That is catastrophic in itself. And then we need to look at, and I'm not going to discuss too many specific pathologies, it's not my place to do so, but you do need to bear in mind certain conditions and the rate at which they've increased. And all of the top 3 non-communicable diseases have now become such an extent that they affect more than 1 in 2. So we have a divide straight down our populations with regards to your risk and the likelihood of you developing them. So we need to stop. We need to hit the brakes. We need to do something differently. And it's never too soon. And neither is it ever too late. So whether you're in this room and you're in your early 20s, or you're in this room and you're in your late 70s, today is the day. Make a better choice today and start to shape up what tomorrow is going to look like. So, is everyone with me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for the confident response. Feel free to shout out and answer things as we go through. So, I love this. A milligram of prevention is worth a kilogram of cure. People often ask me, what is the best treatment for this? What's the best treatment for that? First of all, I always say I work in the preventative space. So anything that I work with, and some of you will know that I'm currently the CPO for a nutritional supplement company, and I've spent a lot of time in that space. We don't sell medicine. We're not selling things to cure things. What we are promoting, what we are advocating, what it is that we're doing is to equip people to have better dietary practice so that they are working in the preventative space. Optimize your nutritional health to minimize your risk of ever needing to take something as a treatment or a cure. And the reality is, nothing is ever as good again as when it was unaffected. It doesn't matter whether it's a muscle sprain, whether it's a bone fracture, and certainly in the context of post-surgery or having dealt with any kind of serious disease, nothing is ever as good as before that ever happened. That's just a fact. And don't get me wrong, you can get things really, really good. You can get an excellent quality of life. Of course you can. But to remain intact, to remain injury and disease-free is the best possible thing you can do. That's the place to be. And I always encourage people, if you feel good today, the target is to keep that. Work on that. Just work on improvement and not perfection. Just work on keeping this. If you're good today, brilliant. Hold on to it, cherish it, and invest in it. And no matter where you're starting from, so if you're in the room and you're thinking, well, this sounds terrible because I've already broken my arm or I've already had this disease, the fact is you will always be better for optimizing your nutritional health. So wherever you are today, see it as the start point. Start to be preventative today with regards to whatever is left of the road ahead of us. Now, we're going to get into a series of slides that some in the room it will make perfect sense to, and for others it might be a bit more challenging. But for everyone, there is an examination at the end, and you don't get to take your break or leave at 7 o'clock unless you get 90% on the test. Okay? So we're starting with the easy stuff. And I'm going to take you down the road of compromised immune function. This is a biggie. I can put this down because we're going to be on this slide for a moment, so I don't need to hold the clicker. Lessons learned from COVID. I'm now part of a new strategy panel in the UK, which is we're going, right then, what did we learn from COVID? What should we be thinking next? And it's an interesting group to be a part of, because for some people, it's like it never happened. They go, oh yeah, I remember COVID, yeah. Because everything's got back to how it was. And that's the problem. That is the problem. The whole world, I want to remind you now, and I don't want to trigger any kind of negative feelings, but the whole world was shut down. We shut down the world. We kept everybody at home. Life changed dramatically in a heartbeat because of a virus. And then gradually we unlocked society and life, and now we're all back as if it never happened. And that is a crime, because there is a lot of lessons to be learned from COVID-19, and we need to take lessons from it. In my area, as a cellular physiologist, as somebody who works within this space, the main thing we have to remember is what we discussed for 2.5 years whilst it all happened, is that too many people had a poor immune function. Their immune system was under such a load, and we talk about immunological load, how much does your immune system have to cope with in a normal situation, that it couldn't cope effectively with the introduction of a virus that could hide undetected, that could bring about an alteration to the cell, and then once revealed, prompted a huge overreaction of the immune system. We need to remember this. At the heart of this pandemic, we had compromised immune function. And the question at the time, and the question now, should be why? Why did we have such a compromised immune function? And there you go. Well, there's your full list. I'm going to take you through them all now, because it describes the modern world and why we need to do things differently, why we need to take a preventative approach and mindset to how we live. In no particular order, but I'll take you through from the left to the right. Sedentary and indoor lifestyle, lack of sun, UV exposure. Marketeers selling sun lotion have made an entire species scared of the sun. Fact. I'm from Ireland. Literally, we're whiter than white. We are the whitest people on the planet, apart from brown and red hair. And throughout my childhood in the 70s and 80s, no one even knew about sun cream or sunblock. And when the sun came out, we ran at it, because it didn't come out very often. And we would allow it to turn our white skin red, and we would embrace the sun. And then later on, we were told about sun cream and the risk of skin cancer, and there was lots of things that developed up to create a narrative that now we have entire societies and people who are terrified of the sun, who even on an average day will refuse to go out unless they're covered in the stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. We should be cautious, but it's about moderation. It's about getting the balance right. On an average day, going about your business, doing what you do in the middle of the summer, you should be fine. Wear a hat and a t-shirt. Because actually, when we are under UVB light, this stimulates vitamin D, which isn't actually a vitamin, it's a steroidal hormone. Vitamin D is keyly implicated in several immune functions, and our body stimulates and generates sufficient amount of vitamin D to maintain its place in a series of biochemical processes. But we don't. We cover ourselves in all kinds of things to prevent that UVB from having any interaction with our skin, even on days when it's unnecessary, even on days when we won't be so exposed to it. But worse than that, too much of our lives these days is spent under these artificial lights, indoors, whilst we work, whilst we consume endless amounts of TV and internet, social media. So we spend too much time away from natural light. And also the big one, which is sedentary behavior. which has become the #1 lifestyle indicator with regards to quality of life, life expectancy, and risk of disease. Because you're made to move. I've actually written a book and it's called that. You are made to move. For those who were here earlier on, as I've said before, movement is the first language. It's how we express ourselves in the world first, is through movement. We go from movement to crawl, to toddler, to walk, to run. Movement is the first type of communication. And what happens now is we reach a point in life, typically early adulthood or late childhood, and then we start to engage in more and more sedentary behavior. Not good for the system. I used this analogy before because there's a dealership at the back of the Lamborghini, the high-performance engine, that's capable of so much, but if it's only ever in your garage, parked up with the brakes on, it's as useless as a car that's not even worth €2,000. It has to be moved to be optimized. And this compromises our immune function, but not in the way you think. So I'm going to ask a question, and I know there's some uber intelligent people in the room, far more qualified than me. What happens to our immune function when we exercise? And I mean at the time. So I want you to imagine me running down the room now, this gentleman here who's already introduced himself to me, what happens to our immune function? So that's the outcome, true. If you exercise, your immune function is better. If you don't, your immune function is more compromised. But what I want someone to explain to me now is the minute I start to run, and let's say I'm running for 5, 6, 7 minutes, what happens to my immune system? No, the opposite. It shuts down. It goes into a period of rest. And this is incredible because your immune system is working away constantly. We have very little time for respite. And when we exercise, when we get above a certain level of activation, breathing rate and heart rate, actually what happens, the energy from the immune system is directed towards the output, and the immune system and the endocrine system both get a reprieve. They get offloaded. This is a part of why they are galvanized. This is a part of why they function better for the person who's more active, because they've got more periods of deactivation, of respite and recovery. And that's why I asked the question, because people think, well, everything goes up. It does. But the endocrine system and the immune system get a rest. So when you're a person who exercises, who's physically active more often, and engages in exercise as a regular part of their week, the way you're making your immune system stronger is by giving it some rest, which is the exact same way that your muscles get stronger. So you exercise and then you rest, and the rest leads to the adaptation. When you exercise, the immune system rests, and the rest leads to the strengthening of the immune system. So sedentary behavior puts more stress, constant load on the immune system, and it's what we call immunological fatigue or immunological burden. It's having to cope all the time. Now we get into my favorite area, fact, diets that are high in processed foods and low in nutrients. High in energy, lots of calories. That's why from 1954, everyone in the world started to get taught about counting calories, because that's how the new food looked. I promise you now, prior to that time, if you'd spoken to somebody in 1930s about calories, they'd have gone, what? What are you talking about? What's this got to do with anything? But then we industrialized food to such an extent, they went, we need to explain to people, because if they eat too much of this, it's not going to be good. So we'll get them to count it. And ever since we've been counting calories, we've been getting bigger. Ever since we've been counting them. It didn't work. And it's high in everything you don't want, typically jam-packed with synthetics that have very little effect, plenty of calories, plenty of other quite sinister things, and no nutrients. And that's most of what people eat. And that leads to nutrient deficiencies. So we see people who are nutrient deficient. And this actually leads into the next one, which is the diet that's low in vegetables and fruit. So low vitamins, low minerals. So why does that matter? I've kind of explained it in the context of vitamin D. So what I want you to imagine now is I want you all, actually, to write your own autobiography. You're going to write a book about yourself. Sound good? Able to do that? It should be a story you know. You've lived it. Okay? I want to know everything. I want to know your childhood memories. I want to know the first person you fell in love with, the person who broke your heart, the job, everything. The highs, the lows. Tell me your life story. But here's the rules. You're not allowed to use any words that contain the letters A, B, C, D, E, K, Z. Okay? All good? Bit more challenging? Hard to get your message across? Yeah? So vitamins, minerals, essential fats, they are the alphabet of the language with which your body communicates. So when you look at a series of biochemical processes, and get ready because I'm going to show you one, you will see that implicated within those steps are vitamins and minerals and key polyunsaturated fatty acids. And so where there's a deficiency, there's one of two outcomes. There's either a delay or there is a breakdown in communication. And this can lead to quite dire consequences. If you look at a circumstance whereby the body is trying to combat a virus and the virus is relentless, attack, 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 and your response to that is intermittent because of deficiencies, your biochemical response is delayed, is stalled, insufficient, who's going to win? Who gets to overwhelm? The one who's constant and aggressive? Or you going, I'll do a bit. Oh, stop. Oh, yeah. Imagine they're punchers. And someone is there punching you in the face, constant. And you go, stop. Stop. So that deficiency leads to poor consequences. And so think of it in the terms of communication. So all of these points here, will the pointer work? He asks himself. All of these points here, certainly these three, they add up to a total. A diet that's high in processed and fast foods is low in nutrients, too many calories. This leads to a consequence we'll discuss later, which is successive overeating, which leads to overweight and obesity, which leads to metabolic disorders, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Nutritional deficiencies lead to breakdown in biochemical pathways and processes, and diets that are low in these also compounds and confounds this low vitamin mineral need. And all of this is starving the immune system of what it needs in order for it to function. And remember, 70% of immune function takes place within the gut, which is the center of absorption, of nutrient absorption. There's lots, we could do a whole talk on the gut alone. There's lots that happens in there. But what you need to think is when we're going to go back to this notion that food is medicine and that you are what you eat, the interaction with us and food takes place within the gut, from which 70% of immune function. Then we get into chronic stress. It's an interesting one, this, because people are living busy lives, chasing work, chasing personal achievements. Then we've got other things that are around that. I don't know if you've been paying attention. The world's gone mad in the past 3, 4, 5 years, like literally balmy. We've had the pandemic, and then we've had all the other craziness that's come in the wake of that. But then there are other things that lead to chronic stress. Do you know what is the number one influence and factor in most people's lives that leads to low-level chronic stress? Do you know what it is? No? TV. You're close with TV.
Yeah, TV and radio.
You're close. Social media. Social media. Phones. I've spent a little bit of time in Tallinn now. I've been into the town 3 times. I've run around the place twice. And it's just like everywhere else in Europe. And at least 4 times, I've had people nearly walk directly into me. And I'm not the biggest person in the world, but I'm not small. And do you know why this has happened? Yeah, show you. Oh, sorry. Oh, real world. Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it? And this is the reality of life. Have you heard of the phrase doom scrolling? Yes. You know that phrase, yeah? Doom scrolling. On your social media feed, going, yeah, war, famine, death, terrible dinner, cat jumping out or something. So people looking at their screens, either feeling anxious, envious, fearful, and then the world has gone crazy. And then you've got to worry about things like cost of living crises and fuel crises and all these things that is all around us. And so we have this constant level of chronic stress, and your immune system has to cope with that. Constant pressure. Sleep disturbances, deprivation. If you were inclined to go into a research search engine to look for peer-reviewed articles and things, most of my work has been in the area of chronobiology. And I've done several studies. In fact, I was one of the authors of a consensus paper for the British Medical Journal 3 years ago, which was Sleep in the Athlete. Done a lot of sleep studies, a lot of how sleep impacts on health, how it affects people who work shifts, how it impacts athletes who are traveling, all kinds of things. One of the things I'm really comfortable talking about is sleep. And in fact, we've just had a paper accepted by Nature, which is another sleep study that we've conducted. Are you aware of the fact that year on year, more and more people report to their doctor and hospital that they are dealing with sleep issues? Are you aware of that? Yeah? So like most of the conditions now, insomnia and sleep-related disorders are increasing year on year. Do you know how many hours ideally you should get most nights of the week of sleep? You know what the guidelines say? 8 hours. 7 to 8, yeah. Do you know what the average is for people over age 45? 4. Just less than 6, yeah. You might go, that's not so bad, it's terrible. Add that up as a total over the year, times that by 365. Look how many hours sleep you've missed out on. Are you aware of the fact that when you sleep is when the body does most of its recovery, remodeling, remolding? Do you know that's when you consolidate things to memory, that cognitive download? Do you know it's the other key time in the day when your endocrine immune systems get some respite? You're aware of all this? It's when your muscle replenishes itself, the bone replenishes itself. All of these things are the outcome of sleep. Sleep is essential. And year on year, people are getting less of it. In the UK, do you know when the most likely time for a road traffic accident is? Do you think it's in the morning or in the evening? Have a guess. In the morning. In the morning. Do you know why? So here's an interesting thing. We did a study on this for an insurance company. So in the UK, in the morning, rush hour, versus in the evening rush hour, where do you think people travel the fastest? Morning. Wrong. They travel fastest in the evening because they want to go home. They finish work, they want to go home. In the morning, they travel slowest. In the morning, they have the most accidents. Do you know why? Because they're still tired. That's right. It's called sleep inertia. So they've been asleep all night and they wake up tired. That makes no sense. That's like drinking a litre of water and going, yeah, I'm really thirsty. You've just literally drank. You've just woken up and now you're really tired. It's because of compromised sleep. Poor sleep patterns, interrupted sleep, insufficient amount of sleep. And also, it's not one day. It's day after day after day. It's chronic buildup of a lack of sleep. And this compromises your immune function. Then we get to alcohol. Hands up in the room, everybody who's never had a glass of alcohol. That was overwhelming. It's like a Mexican wave. Every study that's ever been done concludes you've never had one glass of alcohol. I don't think that deserves a round of applause, but you know, fair, well done. Yeah. Every study that's ever been done, and the most recent was done by the University of Oxford, which included over 220,000 participants, concludes that no matter how little alcohol you consume, a reduction in alcohol improves your health markers. No matter how little. Now, normally, someone goes, but I read an article that said a glass of red wine every day is good for your heart. Yeah? That article was probably paid for and sponsored by a red wine vineyard in France somewhere. And don't get me wrong, a glass of red wine, it's got antioxidants in there, and yeah, for sure, and everything in moderation. So I'm not telling everyone not to drink, but the reality is we do have an alcohol issue in the world. And no matter how little you have, a reduction leads to a better outcome. But we're not really talking about moderate people who have the odd glass of wine with a meal. We're talking about excessive alcohol consumption, which, believe it or not, it's the #1 used and abused drug in the world, leads to problems with your immune function. Sad news is that your age is working against you. You have to just recognize that and embrace it and go, okay, if age is working against me, then I want to do all the other things I can manage to counteract the fact that as I get older, immune function changes and down-regulates. So you want to do all the other good stuff to make up for the fact that your age will work against you. Genetics, for sure, but again, this should be a motivator. I am so tired of people who are so passive, and they'll say, well, my dad had heart disease, or my mum had this. So that should be all the warning you need. Get up and do stuff. Don't be so passive and accept it. If you look at your family history and you can see heart disease, you know what you should do? Run. Make better food choices. Exercise. Do all the good stuff that's going to counteract it. Not go, well, there you go. It's in the family. It's crazy, isn't it? So yes, genetics plays a part. It can increase your risk of certain things, but you're always in charge of how your genes are expressed. You should always work against it. And genetics will compromise immune function. And then here's a big one here in the modern world, toxins, pollution, and that can be industrial, environmental, or it can be cigarettes, cigars, pipes, vaping, electronic cigarettes, all that kind of stuff. Now, I'm not going to ask if anyone in the room smokes at all. I've never understood the logic of it, if I'm honest with you. And there is no good one. So people will say to me, is vaping better than smoking? It's like, no, it's all terrible. It's all terrible. And think of this. The guidelines are, if there's a fire in your home, is to get down low, don't inhale the smoke, and get out as quickly as you can. Yeah? Is that same over here? Or do you have different rules? Do you go, no, we run at it, inhale the smoke, carry it outside and breathe it out? So they're the guidelines. Because the lungs, you may not know this, but your lungs love oxygen. That's what they love. They don't really like much else getting in the way. And when you smoke and you introduce a toxin, a carcinogenic effect, it damages the lung. And it can be severely debilitating for the lung. And so whether it's a pipe or a cigar or a cigarette or an electronic cigarette, they all damage the lung. Fact. And that has a huge impact on your immune function. So here we go. All of this leads to increased risk of infection, but all of this also leads to increased risk of non-communicable disease and a downturn in your quality of life. So we need to consider the inflammatory response for a moment before we look at the next bit. If, God forbid, you were to fall over and break your arm, your body, omega-6, would send a signal. I'm going to show you there's more than just omega-6, but there are certain aspects that would send a signal to increase the inflammatory markers, circulating inflammatory cytokines, which will prompt the immune system to start to upregulate and address the problem. And it will start to look this. You've got your injury or infection, you get this big inflammatory response. This increases certain things like T cells, and all kinds of magic goes on that we're going to look at in a moment, and we get a healing effect. So inflammation is an essential aspect of immune function. The problem we have in the modern world is something that we call or refer to as chronic inflammation or systemic inflammation, or another term is low-level inflammation. And this is the fact that because of poor choices, because of a lack of activity, our body lives in this low-level state as though there's always something wrong. And so we have this environment where there are constantly circulating inflammatory markers. This in itself is a part of that immunological load, burden, and the immune system is constantly activating and working on biochemical pathways to address a problem that isn't really there. When you break your arm, the body, and think about this for a minute, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, if you break a bone, the body upregulates these processes and repairs the bone. Yeah? Have you ever thought about the fact it's so clever that it knows when to stop? Have you ever thought about that? So the body will do a repair. If you cut your skin, the body will re-network and the complete healing, and you'll get healed skin. Once that signal's sent, it completes the job. It knows what to do. It doesn't keep going. If it did, you'd have this mass accumulation of skin layering upon itself, going crazy, because it's just going heal, heal, heal. You'd have really thick, useless bones because the body would just keep trying to heal the site. One of the clever things with regards to immunological response and healing processes is that we can trigger them and they know when they've completed. So imagine it when there's no problem. Not really. There's no mechanism, there's no presence of a pathogen or a virus, but there's this constant low-level inflammation. So you've got a response that's looking for something to address. And the whole time, the immune function is having to deal with this burden and work the way through. Everyone probably knows that already. Yeah? This is the first slide that there's questions afterwards. So don't cheat and take photographs. I even saw our hematologist just take a quick photograph of that. No cheating. I will simplify this. And I use this illustration just to literally illustrate the point. So on the left there, we have your innate immunity. What do you think your innate immunity is? No one want to guess at it? Oh, what are you born with? Exactly. Nature gave you a chance. Didn't just throw you into the world naked and go, right then, you wouldn't last long. Through evolutionary processes of many millions of years, and certainly the past 160,000 in our current state, we've developed a level of innate immunity. Okay, so we come out into the world with a fighting chance. And actually our innate immunity, believe it or not, sits behind every single immunological response. Our acquired immunity is developed through and from our interaction with the world. So the mud, the dirt you play in as a child, the things that you eat, the air that you breathe, the coughs, the colds, the viruses that you engage with. In fact, viruses have shaped our trajectory as a species. Literally, viruses have shaped us. And I won't delve into it now, but you may not recognize or know this, but actually 60% of you is viral genetics. If you were to look at you and analyze you from a gene point of view, about 60% of your genes are actually origin traced back to certain types of virus. Viruses have shaped us, and they've helped to shape our immune, our adaptive immune, our acquired immune system. And so back here is the framework of our immune system, and then here is what we learn about the world through our interaction. And I want to take you down just to a point here, which is where we get to these T lymphocytes and these CD8 and CD4 cells. These are really, really clever, because anyone who's interested in philosophy, which I am, the pursuit of philosophy is to, again, to quote another great, is to know thyself is the greatest wisdom. And actually, one of the cleverest things about CD8 and CD4 cells is they do know. They know what's you and what's not you. So when a pathogen, when a virus or an infection comes about, they're a part of the process that go, this isn't us. So we need to eliminate this. This shouldn't be here. And they are circulating. They're constantly monitoring the system. And they are feeding back. So it's a two-way system, activating, identifying things that shouldn't be there, recognizing pathogens, telling your immune system you need to do something. And then this goes back up to these T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. And what you get then is you get an upregulation of cells that will deal with the pathogen. It's phenomenal. Your immune system is absolutely incredible. It is a miracle in itself. And it is fine-tuned, balanced, and effective so long as it's not exhausted. And this is what it does. So the innate, what you're born with, everything goes back to this. And you can see here key aspects of that. Epithelial barriers, digestive features, antimicrobial proteins, these natural killer cells, which are typically natural killer B cells. And anyone who's looked at any kind of cancer physiology or cellular physiology will be familiar with those. We have other innate cells and the inflammatory response. So the structure of what's going to happen, you're born with. And then over here, we have that fine-tuning and that adaptive nature of it. If we delve into the gut microbiota, I have quite a unique biota, and I'll explain why in a moment. But a biota is regional. So your gut microbiota is fully formed and developed by the age of about 4 years old. After that, your gut health is entirely based on the choices you make, the types of food you put in, if there's a sufficient amount of dietary fibers, if you are nurturing the gut environment, those probiotics, postbiotics, it really is dependent on what you do. And it's regional, it's geographic. So the average gut map of people in Estonia is entirely different to the average gut map of people in the UK, or Ireland, or Australia, or whatever you'd like to say. So what makes mine unique? I'm never in the same country for more than a few days. Technically, I live in the UK, but in the past 7 days, I've been to 5 countries. And next week, I go to Paris, and then I go back to Sweden, and then go to Norway, and the list goes on. And so I am constantly experiencing foods and water from different parts of the world all the time. So I have a very unique gut microbiota because of that fact. Most people don't travel that much. And so their gut microbiota, its geography is more stable. Mine's not. And so all of this plays a part in this miraculous stuff that happens there. I like to think of these as ninjas. Do you know what a ninja is? Yeah? No? Not giving much away. Ninjas were those Japanese kind of assassins, all in black, hiding away. They even had black blades, waiting to see what they were going to kill, out, and they didn't even know it was happening. That's what these are like. And certainly the killer B cells, they hide, they wait, and they attack the assassin. So this one is the decider as to whether or not you get a break. Okay? Take a look. Don't take a photograph. I'm joking. So I'm showing this for a specific reason. This slide here, don't worry, it'll come back. This slide is an overview of the entire process and interaction between innate and acquired immunity. It's not as simple as this. This is a very simplified version. This slide shows, and this is how we would teach it, this shows a level of interaction and immunological response, and in this instance, in the context of the presence of a virus. Remember, viruses have shaped us, they're a part of who and what we are, but they can also kill us. What stands out to you when you look at the detail in this? What do you notice?
All roads to the inflammation.
Yeah. So we've got the inflammatory response, but what else do we see that's written here specifically so you can see it clearly in the part it plays? I'll give you a clue, if I can get this. We can see the presence of vitamin E, vitamin C, beta-carotene, zinc. Over here we've got the omegas, 3 and 6. Over here you can see the presence of sugars, carbohydrates, lipids, dietary fibers, phenylytics. So you can see now, when we zoom in on this activation, and we see the processes that are taking place and the communication that's taken place, and when I went back to you a moment ago and said, write your autobiography, but you can't use words with these letters. So now when we see this assembled as a response and what needs to be in place in order for that immune function to do what it is to respond to and deal with the pathogen. So what happens if there's insufficient vitamin E? and insufficient vitamin C, then we miss a whole step. What happens if I'm over here and I eliminate a sufficient amount of omega-3? What happens if I'm down here and I eliminate or lower the level to a deficiency of vitamin D? Huge, huge gaps in the entire process. And do you remember a moment ago when I used the analogy of being punched in the face, and if you're only going to respond once in a while, who's going to win that fight? And this is exactly what we're talking about. All too often, people, their understanding of nutrition, it's far too simplified. And particularly in the context of health, they will go, yes, I understand nutrients, vitamins, we need to have them. But they've forgotten literally the part they play in biochemical processes. That these aren't just things that are nice to have. They're not decorations in the home. These are active parts. This is why most of them need to be consumed daily or stimulated daily. Most of them need to have a residual equilibrium, so they have to be in dynamic balance in order for the system to function as it should. People often talk about boosting the immune system, and I greatly dislike that language. The immune system is fantastic. What we need to do is stop delaying the immune system. To boost it is arrogant. What we need to do is to enable the normal function of the immune system. And the way that we can do that is to optimize our dietary health, is to make sure that the component parts we need are sufficiently in place, in sufficient amounts, so there is no deficiency, so that the biochemical consequences, interactions and activations are enabled to run on course and run smoothly. I always encourage, particularly my medical colleagues, and when I present at medical conferences, I get them to imagine this from the other end. So stay with me for a moment. If you've undergone a catastrophic event, say you've had a huge drug overdose, and you've gone into any kind of seizure or coma, and you're admitted to a hospital, one of the first things they will do is IV, intravenously, start to pump your body with nutrients. High dose vitamin C, high dose vitamin D, B12, they will start to high dose things. And we know why we do that. You speak to any medic, you know why we do that. It's to make sure there's a complete flush through and flood out of those essential vitamins, minerals, in order for the body to be supported and facilitated to respond and do what it needs to do in catastrophic circumstances. Do you remember when I said you'll never be as good as when you feel good? Don't let the bad things happen. So don't let the bad things happen. Go, okay, when it really goes wrong, they are the drastic measures they need to do. Let's not let that happen. Let's go right the way back over here and go, right, I need to optimize my health status. Nutrition is the cornerstone of all health. I need to make sure that the food I eat, the food strategies I employ, guarantee I have a sufficient amount of vitamins, minerals, essential fats, so I'll just make sure that they're part of my diet every single day in order for the system to be able to function optimally. Everyone with me?
Yes. Yep.
Everyone understand that inside out? Everyone, when I turn it down now, you're going to recreate and draw your own version of it? There is a lot to it. And again, I apologize to anyone who has got a biochemical background in the room or who's watching this on a video. There is more to it than this as well. I'm trying to draw your attention to the key aspects of this. So you've got a more simplified understanding. The fact is there are aspects to your immune system that you get on birth and that you adapt, and that nutrients are a key part of immunological function. If there's a deficiency, there is a breakdown, and if there's a breakdown, that leads to catastrophic outcomes. Simple. The problem we have, though, is most of these things are not dramatic. Why do you think we call them lifestyle diseases? They happen slowly over time. And so what happens, we adjust and we accommodate the discomfort. And we've normalized things. One of the things I hear normalized all the time is when someone will say they had a heart attack. And they go, how old were they? And they go, 60. And they go, well, what do you mean, well? You're going to tell me that's okay just because they're 60? That's a crazy thing to think. It's almost like, well, he's 60, these things are going to happen. That's because it's so common, it's normal. What I'd like you to do after this session, or in the break, is go on Google, and I'd like you to go to PubMed, so P-U-B-M-E-D, and you'll see you can put in the year that you'd like to look at articles from. And I want you to go to the year 1916. And I want you to put in cardiovascular disease. And have a look at the top 3 or 4 journals.
60 or 16?
16, 1-6. And do you know what they were discussing back in the early part of the 20th century when it came to cardiovascular disease? And I'm talking about the biggest journals on the planet, the Lancet, Nature, all the medical journals. Do you know what they were discussing? Do you know what the theme was at the start of the 20th century? Any ideas? They were saying, what's gone on? Why is everyone suddenly getting cardiovascular disease? This isn't normal. And people were saying, this is due to the changes we've made in the diet. And the research then was saying there's been this huge spike in cardiovascular disease and in heart attacks. And it's all related to the changes we've made to food. And then what happens is the science and the medicine debate it, and they develop new medicines and ways to manage it and hopefully save people. And then it becomes kind of normal, and it becomes common, and then we go all the way through, and then the next thing comes along. Right now, I can guarantee you, one of the things that people are discussing are metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes. And we go, why is everyone suddenly getting type 2 diabetes? And we go, it's because of the diet. It's because of all this food. And they go, yeah, and we can develop this drug, and we can do that, and we can do this. And my fear is we are going to treat type 2 diabetes, metabolic disorders, the way we treated cardiovascular disease 100 years ago. That we just go, yeah, well, we know what it is, but let's just do it anyway. And then people start to buy into the fiction that when you're 60 and you get a heart attack, well, he was 60. That's got nothing to do with it. It's because of lifestyle factors, dietary choices, loss of activity, all that list we went through. These are hugely preventable conditions. The rate at which they affect populations now is entirely due to people's choices at a personal level. And we can change it. So, I'm going to stick with the immune system for a moment. Things that act upon it. As you can see here now, radiation, bone, neurology, microbiology, and over on the right there, we see the interaction of nutrition and exercise. So all of these things here are classified as, and this is actually taken from Werner's Book of Immunology, 2021, all of these things are factors that directly implicate upon our immunological function. So the top one here, proper nutrition is a requirement for a normal immune response. Deficiencies in any of several dietary requirements have been linked to diminished immune function and/or clinical illness. At the bottom, exercise. Research is uncovering a link between moderate, regular exercise and a strong immune system. There's also an evidence that too much exercise can reduce immunity. And this is really important because people have bought into the idea that elite athletes are healthy. Elite athletes aren't always healthy. They're just always elite athletes. And that's why we, as regular people, shouldn't go to our local gym and go, I read this article about what my favorite, I don't know, put whatever sport in you like, and I'm going to do their program. Because whilst it might get them championships and medals and cups, it's not always health. And tragically, athlete welfare has been dismissed for far too long. And if you look at some of the most successful athletes from the 80s and 90s and look at some of the health challenges they face today, you can see the consequences of the all-out pursuit of fitness. So what we encourage people to do, given that you are the outcome of the things that you do most often, is moderate, sometimes slightly strenuous, but to be active most days. That's the guideline on it. But when it comes to nutrition, try and make far better good choices positive choices that are going to nutritionally enrich your diet than bad ones. Key implicator. It's what we call an endogenous component. Exercise is exogenous. What that means, it's an external stimulant that acts upon the system and the body responds. Food is an endogenous stimulus because you eat it. It interacts with the gut microbiota, it's absorbed and functions at a cellular level. So which of those two do you think is the most powerful, and which of those two are you going to do most often? Eating. Food. Literally, you bring it into your system. And so we discussed at the start this notion of toxins, and they can be environmental. And now we're looking at the difference between external things and internal things. So I want you to think of this even if you don't answer me. When it comes to your vacation in the summer, where do you choose to go? So hands up everyone in the room who's taken a month off work to go on vacation, and they take themselves to the local oil refinery, sewage plant, chemical factory, and go, yeah, I'm just going to have 2 weeks here. It's going to be great. Just going to spend some time, breathe it in, look around, appreciate the engineering. Is that something you do? I thought you were going to put your hand up then. Genuinely thought that girl there was putting her hand up. I thought she doesn't drink, but she loves going to chemical factories. Or do you choose to go to beaches, mountaintops, gorgeous parts of the countryside? Like, where would you choose to go? Do you choose to go to nice, beautiful environments, or do you go to industrial environments?
Nice, beautiful.
Of course you do. Next time you're making a food choice in a supermarket, think the same. What do I want to bring through the system? Do I want to bring a whole heap of industrialized chemicals through my system? Or do I want to bring in something from the beautiful places that I'd rather go and be? Something from the land and of the land, or something that we've chemically engineered? Because endogenous, internal, is always more powerful than exogenous, external. So think about it. So, here's where we are. Hands up, anyone who feels they have a hectic, stressful lifestyle? No? Oh, just a couple. Only 2. Estonians are really chilled out. Yeah, it's all very good, Col, to be honest with you. So, here's a typical roadmap that we see across the world in industrialized nations, which actually includes Estonia. Hectic, stressed lifestyles, fast food, which is energy dense but micronutrient poor. So going to the shop to buy a sandwich, to buy something for lunch, confectionery bars, all that stuff. Low income or lower income typically leads to a limited food choice. So you're typically more likely to buy processed foods. Sedentary lifestyle, obesity, restricts the diet. This leads to poor overall diet quality. Then we have a suboptimal nutritional status, which is directly impacting on a compromised immune function, aligned with our cigarettes, our chronic stress, sleep disturbances, excessive alcohol, and prolonged excessive exercise. In this instance, we get an increased risk of infection. So, all factors lead to the same point, and that overall compromise increases all your risk of development of a non-communicable disease and lower quality of life. So, we are on 15:15. I think what I'll do, because we're going to take a break in 10 or 15 minutes, so you can stretch your legs and get some fresh air and take a coffee. We'll go through a couple of the health consequences, take that as a segue, take a break, and then we'll storm through all the good stuff, okay? I'm setting the scene here, and obviously, like a Walt Disney film, everything gets bad before it gets better. So it will get better. There will be a path out of this jungle. And so this is from the World Health Organization, which is directly informed by the Office of Global Burden. And I'm not going to go through all of this list, but when people do lists, what kind of list do they normally give? Do they give, is the top 13 list common? What do people normally give? Top 3, top 5, top 10. But this crazy Irishman showed up in Estonia with a top 13. Yeah? And why have I done that? I'm going to explain it quickly. So number one, a compromised immunity leads to all-cause mortality. So principal cause of death. High blood pressure, high LDL, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke. That's enough. I could have stopped my list there. Scary enough. You all need to listen to me. I'm going to save your life. Yeah? But the reason why I've done the top 13 is because these, to me, are the ones that give the early warning sign. Everything else is diagnosable. Everything else, you already know it's gone wrong. It's broken. You're going to go and speak to somebody who's got a title. But actually, low quality of life, people just endure it. They just go, well, that's the way it is. They just put up with it quietly. And tolerating a low quality of life never made anybody's quality of life any better. But that's what people do. Mental illness. We are living in a pandemic of mental health crisis. We've never been richer as societies. We've never had more. And yet, we've got huge amounts of desperation, depression, and anxiety the world over. Do you know what is the number one cause of death for men aged between 35 and 49 in the UK? Suicide. In a rich, affluent, Western, industrialized nation, young men are killing themselves. The number one cause of death back home.
For which age?
35 to 49. I'm safe now, I'm 51. But it's true. 35 to 49, the number one cause of death for young men. That tells you something about the world we live in. It's a warning. Depression, anxiety. 13, body pain and difficulty with physical functioning. This happens, I hear a story about this every day in my life, bar none. Why don't you run anymore? Knee pain. I got told running's bad for my knees. Why would that be the case? Running badly might be bad for your knees, but running well is really good for your knees. Imagine if I said to you, go into the gym and lifting weights be really bad for your elbow. You go, why is that? I know I'm making all the muscles strong and I'm increasing the vascularization and strengthening the tendons. So why is the elbow bad? Yeah, it makes no sense at all, does it? So when you run and you do thousands of repetitions of your own body weight, which is strengthening the muscles and strengthening the tendons and the ligaments and all that kind of stuff, why would that give you knee pain? It's crazy, isn't it? When you think it through, it makes no sense whatsoever. Running badly will, for sure. But body pain, people tell me all the time what they're limited by, and this is people I went to school with. I enjoy Facebook because I get to look at people I went to school with, and I say to my children, see him? Same age as me. Look at him? Same age as me. Can't look at that? Just had a stroke? Same age as me. Literally, it makes me feel really good about myself. But all the time, people are saying to me, I get this shoulder pain, or when I wake up in the morning and I get this back pain and I get a headache, and it's just normal. Do you realize the percentage of people that leave their home in the morning for work and take with them their own supply of painkillers? Paracetamol, ibuprofen, anti-inflammatories. Yeah? And here's another thing that I find alarming, is that if they haven't got them themselves and they get a headache or they feel a bit of a pain, they're really happy to go, do you have any drugs? Can I have some of your drugs? That's the world we live in. People are leaving the home with their own drugs that they've bought over the counter, and if they haven't got any, it's completely normal and acceptable to say to someone, could you give me some of your drugs, please? I'm in pain. And we go, yeah, there you go. No one goes, what? You're in pain. You need to take drugs. What's going on? It's common, so we think it's normal. And so for me, when I look at the health consequences of this, all this stuff's really obvious. Of course, these things you're going to go and see a doctor. But what we need to pick up on ourselves and on behalf of the people around us are these factors here. These are the early warning signs. These aren't the end point. These are the start point. This is where quality of life, general health is starting to deteriorate manifestly. And then this is for sure going to start to lead into other consequences. One, it's like a domino effect. One opens the door to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. Do you know that if you get type 2 diabetes, your risk of developing another type of disease goes up by 87%? Do you know that if you are obese, your risk of developing type 2 diabetes goes up by 97%? So just follow the breadcrumb trail. One leads to the other, leads to the other. If you're overweight or obese, you're at greater risk of developing certain types of cancers, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, stroke. They're not things in isolation, they're not passive. One is a consequence of the other. And I think we can trace a lot of this back to what we're all dealing with and seeing every single day over here. And these are, make no mistake about it, the outcomes of a compromised immunity. This isn't my opinion, this is evidence from the World Health Organization as informed by the Office of Global Burden. Very real stuff. Got 2 more slides, then you can have a coffee and go, oh my God, this is hard work. So, in 1980, there were 108 million people living with diabetes. Currently, there's just over 422 million. That's expected to rise quite heavily. So the targeted figure over the next 10 years is going to be beyond 600 million. So type 2 diabetes is in itself a pandemic. Between 2000 and 2016, we saw a 5% increase in premature mortality from diabetes. And between 1973 and 2015, cancer diagnosis amongst 15 to 39-year-olds increased by 30%. It used to be that people said cancer was a disease of old age. It's not true anymore. Cancer is just a disease that affects people. In fact, it affects 1 in 2.2 people. We're nearly at the point of it affecting 50% of the entire population. It affects more people. And before anyone has the audacity to say it's because of better detection rates, that's just simply not true, and you know it. It's not true. More people are getting cancer. That's the truth. It's got nothing to do with how well we can detect it. Early detection leads to better outcomes and earlier intervention and treatment. It's got nothing to do with the statistics. I don't know if you know this, but in the UK, up until 2004, there wasn't a single case of a child having type 2 diabetes. Now they make up nearly 15% of all new diagnoses every year. So children with type 2 diabetes is the direct outcome of one thing. And you know what that is?
Nutrition.
Diet.
Yeah, parents who can't say no. Parents who can't be parents. Parents who want to be popular. And go, no, you can't have that. I've had parents say to me, I know you say that, but what do I do when he complains and moans? Go, yeah, carry on. Grab a chair and watch. Clap. There you go. Be a parent. It's not always your job to be their best friend. It's your job to be the parent and give them the best steer and advice in life and put them on the best path and nurture their health. That's what you need to do. It's a crime. And so we need to buck the trend. I don't know if you saw this publication in February 2024. There are now 1 billion people in the world who are obese. Not overweight, there's more of them. Obese. But do you understand why this is a landmark? Do you know what this means? Because for the first time in history, we've tipped the scale. Do you know what I mean by that? There are now more people in the world dealing with obesity than dealing with type 1 malnutrition. There are more people who are obese than starving. So we've reached a new milestone in poor health. Now our issues are more focused on too much indulgence and affluence than they are deprivation. So this, a bit like the pandemic, a bit like statistics I've told you about diabetes, a bit like statistics I've just revealed to you about cancer, all that kind of stuff. This should be red warning signs. Everywhere, we need to do things differently. We need to be accountable and we need to bring about a change. Had you all seen this? Did this news reach you? So it's reached a couple. Just do me a favor, because I'm always interested to know how many people heard about this in February when it was reported. Okay, how many people knew about it before today? So that worries me. And that often, you know what, I'm just going to go side note for a second. People say to me, Col, why did you move from research and the institute to doing what you do now? And I said, because it takes 10 years for anything we know in research to make a difference in the world. This is great. This is arguably, should be one of the top headline grabbers in the world. And until I showed up today, you didn't know about it. That's why I do what I do now, because people need to be aware. You've got to fast track the information. And this is the Lancet. And I know there's one medic in the room, and there are probably others. Anyone with a medical background, the Lancet is the Bible. It's the highest impact journal in the world. So to say that this research is of the highest standard puts it mildly. 1 billion people. And all these people are at increased risk and dealing with a compromised immune function day in, day out. This is a storm on the horizon that we're going to have to deal with. This is a real worry and a real problem. This is the last slide before you get a break. And then after the break, it's all the happy stuff. I promise you, come back. It's going to be joyful. We're going to sing songs and embrace each other. So, a raised BMI, body mass index, so when you're overweight and obese, okay, is a major risk factor for non-communicable diseases. Fact. This is why I got in trouble. I made a comment about people celebrating obesity, you know, with t-shirts, pop stars, and I said, I can't endorse this. I think it's gross. You're celebrating sickness. It's not about body confidence. Body confidence is like, you know, parachuting, rolling down a hill, playing with your grandchildren. That's body confidence. It's not being overweight and wearing a t-shirt. And the reason why I'm staunchly against it is because obesity is a disease and it has manifestation of symptoms. So it increases your risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke. It was the leading cause of death in 2012. It increases your risk of diabetes, musculoskeletal disorders, osteoarthritis, and joint degeneration. Some cancers, including endometrial, breast, ovarian, prostate, liver, gallbladder, kidney, and colon, some of which are the top 4 cancers in the world. And the risk for these non-communicable diseases increases with every increase of your BMI. So as you get bigger, your risk increases. So it's not a case of, okay, so I'm big now, I've got bigger risk. As you get bigger, the risk multiplies too. This is why we need to take this seriously. This is why we need to intervene. And this is one of the biggest reasons why we really need to focus on preventative health. Now I've done all the scary stuff, the horrible stuff, the heavy stuff. Grab a coffee or a shot of whiskey, eat some chocolate, come back in the room in 15 minutes, and we'll do all the nice stuff. Okay, thank you for listening. Part 2, the happy ending, is coming up. Everyone okay? Do you have a nice coffee? Okay, I promised you that we would move on to brighter things, and I'm going to stay true to that promise. But we still need to look at something else as a reality check. We looked at it in the earlier session today for those people who are here, but we're going to look at it again in the context of health for the people who weren't here. And it's just a moment for us to recognize the situation as it is. So we've looked a lot about immune function and dysfunction, the causes of that. We've looked a lot at how biochemical processes require those micro vitamins, nutrients, and we've set the stage with regards to the reality of the challenges we face from a health point of view. So now we're going to look at the final part of the reality check before we start looking through, well, what difference does nutrition make? Why are these things important? What is it we need to do about it? Okay? So I showed this earlier in a different context, but I'm going to show it again now. This is the reality of how people eat in Western industrialized modern nations, where 60 to, actually it's a little bit higher. I'm always conservative when I show these figures. If I was to go with the latest published data in this area, what you would see here is that there's a range of 65 to 80% of the foods that people eat are of ultra-processed orientation. And the reason why it's 65 to 80% is because the adults, so people like us, we are confidently within this category here, 60%. But our children are in the upper percentile. So they're more towards the 80%. And the problem we have with that statistic is knowing that much of our food behavior and attitude is established when we're young and we carry it into adulthood. Now, we all live in bubbles. You all live in a bubble. The fact that on a Friday afternoon when the weather is gorgeous in this lovely city, that you've all taken the time out to be inside this room and listen to someone like me talk, already puts you in a small group. You're more health focused, more interested in health and what you can do about health. So you're in a bubble, okay? And in that bubble, it's easy to think, well, everyone, this is important to everyone. Everyone thinks like this. Everyone is going to learn information and change what they do. But that's just simply not the truth. That's not the truth at all. There are lots of other bubbles. One of the biggest bubbles is how these people live. And you have to imagine the world from their perspective. What they see around them is what everyone does. Everybody goes to Kentucky Fried Mutant. Everyone goes to McDonald's. Everyone goes and has a takeout meal. Everybody eats processed food. Everybody has breakfast cereal. Everybody drinks Coca-Cola. What's the problem? Everyone does it. That's the bubble they live in. And when you go, that's not good, they go, what do you mean it's not good? Everyone does it. So it's hard with those people to say you need to do something different. And remember, if knowing was all we needed to do things better, the whole world would be in a better state. We've never lived in it. We used to think it was people's lack of knowledge that stopped them from doing the right thing. We've had Google for nearly 20 years where you can access information in a heartbeat. It's not a lack of information or lack of access to information that stops people doing the right thing. Do you know what stops people doing the right thing? Humans are irrational, and they are emotional, and they are reactive. So there's lots of things that influence on what we do, and knowing is not always enough. And so the reality is that actually 60 to 80% of what people eat nowadays is ultra-processed food, low nutrients, micro and macro, so low and good quality sources of nutrients, which I've already explained is what your body wants and needs. Then we have the processed foods, which takes up another 20% anyway. Culinary ingredients. And I gave this challenge to the earlier group, and I'm going to give it to you. Not everything is what it seems. So you've got to be selective, and you've got to be informed. So you'll see there on the left something that looks very much like a bottle of olive oil. Olive oil is great. Extra virgin olive oil. Even doctors who know very little about nutrition know to say and recommend that you take a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil every day because of its anti-inflammatory properties, its antioxidants, its rich source of phytonutrients. Really, really good. Even doctors who know nothing about nutrition will agree on that. But when you go to the shop to buy some, what I'd like you to do next time is read the backs of several of them. And you'll be surprised to find out that a lot of what is described as virgin olive oil is not virgin olive oil. Because there should be one ingredient in extra virgin olive oil. And do you know what that is? There should be extra virgin olive oil in it. And so go through it, the homework. Go and have a look. You'll be surprised. There are products on the shelf that look like they should be extra virgin olive oil, but you'll find there's more than one ingredient contained within. And a lot of the industry works this way. It'd be easy to think that I was cynical about the processed food industry, industrialized food. And the reason why it's easy to think that is because I 100% am completely cynical about what they do. It's all a big global marketing campaign that is designed to create profit, and they're not interested in your health whatsoever. And so I know there's a question coming up, and I get asked this question a lot. Why do they do this? It's simple. It's the same reason why oil companies in the midst of a crisis are making £19 billion worth of profit. They do it to make money. They would sell anything. They just figured out they could sell food. That's it. Don't expect any morality. They're not really in it. Just because they put a picture of a field on the box, they don't really care about nature. It's just purely to make profit. And they make lots of it. It's a huge industry. And then at the top there, we have our minimally processed foods or our whole foods, fresh foods. And I give this example all the time because it's true. When I'm dealing with one-to-one nutrition consultations, and I'm a registered nutritionist with the British Dietetics Association, I'm qualified and I am professionally able to do what I do, and I ask people to describe what they eat. And remember, they're talking to me, so I get the good version. I get the best version. I get the polished version. So when they're saying to me that they go to Kentucky Fried Chicken twice a week, it's probably 3. When they tell to me they have like frozen pizzas twice a week, it's probably 4. Remember, I get the Hollywood version of what they eat. And they describe all these things that they eat, and then at the end they'll say, oh, but I did have an apple last week. They'll tell me something good. And I find that fascinating because it suggests to me that they really think that one apple can make good on all the things they didn't do, that it's going to redeem their diet. But it doesn't work that way. You are the outcome of the things that you do most often. Consistency is key, and that pyramid needs to be the other way around. It needs to be where it's occupied by whole foods, fresh foods, better choices, and then those processed foods are the tiniest amount once in a while just for a treat. I've just realized that my phone's on, so I'm going to turn it off because that would be embarrassing. And people ring me all the time, and I don't want that in the middle of a talk. So, you can't pretend to yourself. That's important. And when you're having a conversation with someone about health, you have to realize that the vast majority of the time, this is the nutritional context of the person you're talking to. That's just the reality. That's how it is. And do you know what puts people off more than anything? Truth. And telling them they're wrong. I think people must think of people like me and think that wherever I go, I'm saying you shouldn't do that. Why are you doing that? I don't do it at all. It's none of my business. I don't go about life stopping people eating a sandwich. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Do you know what's in there? No, it's not my... the only time I speak to anyone is if they ask me a question. I'm never proactive in it. I used to be when I was young, because when you're young, you think you're going to change the world, don't you? You're like an evangelist. I should have had a collar on. I was like a priest of health. I wanted to convert everyone, throwing holy water left, right, and center. And you realize all you do is upset people and irritate them. They don't want to hear it until they're ready to ask the question. So when you're dealing with someone, and if it's because you're promoting a better choice, a better option, whatever it is, bear in mind they're in that bubble and everything around them has told them it's okay. So tread carefully and think about it and think about, well, what can I do to change this without telling them they're wrong or without aggravating them? How can I get people on side? And the way I've always got people on side, certainly for the past 10 years, is I just encourage them to add the right thing. And it's what I call add before you subtract. So rather than say, stop eating the chocolate bars, stop doing this, stop doing that, before I strip all the joy out of their life, I just say, you know what you should do? You should add some blueberries to this. You should have some fresh sliced cucumber on that sandwich. You should, with your meal, put some broccoli or some spinach on there. I just ask them to add things because I know that's powerful in itself. The epigenetic effect, the gene expression change of having rich sources of nutrients will just gradually start to improve the situation. So that's what I do. I no longer do the whole stop. I just put all the emphasis on what they should do. So what I'm going to take you into now is more kind of statistics. This is very much now based on omega-3, which is a big part of my life. And background, what I do currently. And the reason being, I want to put this in context. So back in 2020, I was working with Health Innovations as a research coordinator. And there have been data published by the Office of Global Burden that said that it was an estimated 6.3 billion people in the world had an omega-3 deficiency. I've discussed deficiencies with you so much. Why is omega-3 so important? Well, first of all, omega-3, like all of the polyunsaturated fatty acids, are essential nutrients. And essential in two contexts. One, our body can't produce them on its own. Okay, so your body can't manufacture these. It's not like vitamin D, where exposure to the sun will stimulate the hormone and you'll get a prevailing level of circulating vitamin D. You don't have that mechanism when it comes to omega-3. You have to get it through dietary choices. And there are different types. There are plant-based omega-3s, and there are what we call the marine omega-3s. And these come from fish, typically, or sea algae. We can't actually digest sea algae very effectively unless we really do something to it, whereas we can consume fish really effectively. The fish we're talking about are things like salmon, mackerel, bluefin tuna, anchovies. So the really good fatty fish. But you also have to have the best examples. So fresh, wild, line caught. So not intensive aquaculture, not farmed fish. It's got to be real high nutrient availability from those fish. And so back in 2020, we were looking at this problem. There's an estimated 6.3 billion people with a fundamental essential deficiency. And the other reason why it's essential is because, and you're probably aware of this, but the omega-3-6 ratio influences the cell membrane. So bear with me a moment. And for those people with a medical health background, I'm going to take you back to your university days. You are a collection of approximately 37 trillion cells. That's what you are for life. They come together. It's called like a chorus of cells. They express every single part of what you are. The cells of the heart know how to function like a heart. The cells of the lungs know how to be lungs. If you look at them under a microscope, they all look pretty similar, unless we look at the neurological brain cells. But the body cells all look very similar, but they know what to do. Some would say they're pre-programmed. But each one of those 37 trillion cells has an outer membrane. And the ratio of omega-6, which is the pro-inflammatory, essential, explained that earlier, to omega-3, which is the anti-inflammatory, essential, and is the resolution of any system, needs to be less than 4:1. In the average diet around the world, what we see, it's in excess of 14.8:1. So way out of what we would call balance. There's also an aspect of this that relates to ratio. So when you're in this level, the art of biology is homeostasis, balance. The body is constantly trying to balance systems off. This is way out of balance. And so from a cellular point of view, you have a dysfunctional cell. And cellular dysfunction leads to physical malfunction. That's a well-established trait within cellular biology. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that not only is there a sufficient provision of an essential nutrient, but that it's working at the right ratio to another aspect of the pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory process. So we at Zinzino actually have the world's biggest database on omega-3 status. Currently, in that database, we have just over 1.5 million independently analyzed and verified blood samples that quantify the omega-3 status. And so I'm going to take you through a few things. But bear in mind, we're talking about a world where there's an increased reliance on fast food, decreased prevalence of fatty fish in the diet, and we have a lot of omega-6. Those omega-6s are a common feature of processed and ultra-processed foods, and actually the common oils and condiments that people use at home. Okay, they're the common ones. So this data is from that database, and it accounts for people who have an average diet and don't take any kind of omega-3 supplement. And what we see is an average, these are the age ranges, an average of 14.8:1. So way out of ratio. To put that in context, when you're at this point of a ratio of omega-6 to 3, you've got definable cellular dysfunction, and you're at the highest risk of the development of a non-communicable disease. If you have a look at the Harrison von Schacke report 2004, which created the omega-3 index, which gives you your risk prediction for cardiovascular disease, if you're at this ratio, you're at the highest possible risk of developing it, okay? And this is how most of the world looks, and above and beyond. I know countries are interested in other countries. In the database, the two highest ratio countries are actually Finland and North America, which the average is way higher than this. But this is a global average. So, let's have a look at the next group. This group are my favorite group because these are people who use a standard fish oil or omega-3 supplement. And their value comes out at 9.9 to 1. So when we look across the different age groups, they're taking a standard shop-bought, over-the-counter omega-3 supplement, and it gets you to 9.9. So my question for all you good people is 9.9 better than 14.8? No. Okay. So given that hold on, you're getting excited now. So given that the target is less than 4 to 1, these people, average diet, don't take anything at 14.8. These people take a supplement and 9.9. My simple question, is not a trick question, is that better than that?
50% better.
Yeah.
It's better. It is better. That's better than that. Come on, be fair. Be kind. That is better. However, we have a phrase in medicine, actually. We have a phrase in statistics and in research, which is called a meaningless difference. And what it means is there's a difference, but it doesn't mean anything. So statistically, if I was to run statistics on this, that would go, that's a statistically different value. And people go, so this is statistically proven. Great, but it's meaningless. Mathematically, it's great, but actually in the real world, it doesn't mean anything. Because you're still way off the ratio that's required at a fundamental biological level. And so I often describe this in this way, and I'm going to do it now just to entertain myself. What I want you to imagine is that there is a soccer football goal post there, yeah? And you and I are going to have a competition. Whoever kicks the ball in the goal gets €1 million. Good competition? Okay? It's not bad, is it? I'll go first, because I'm like that. And by the way, I'm rubbish at football. I was always a rugby player, rubbish at football. I kick the ball, and it goes right in the corner of the room. Okay? And that's me there, 14.8. Didn't have a chance. You step up. You've played a bit of football. You've seen my desperate attempt. You're feeling confident. And you kick the ball, and you're just outside the goalpost. So it just goes wide. So no million for you either. Now, to a certain extent, I can live with that. I knew I was terrible at football, and it was so far off, I didn't have a chance. That's me. For you, you were close. And you play football. You've got to live with that failure for the rest of your life, knowing you could have had €1 million, but you just went a little bit wide. For me, it was a pipe dream. For you, it was close to reality. And that's why these people are my favorite. Because when I discuss with these people what we do and how we do it and the difference it makes, I regularly get people who say to me, no, not interested. I already take a supplement and I'm really, really happy with it. I go, great. Have you ever done a blood test? Have you ever quantified your fatty acid profile? Have you measured that? Do you know it's working? Have you looked at your ratio? Have you looked at your index? And you normally get no, no, no. And then we measure them, and there they are. And they go, you're still happy. You're still taking the best product. And the reason why I asked that question is because back in 2020, when we were thinking of this problem, we went through the obvious things. Because when I was growing up, My mum, God bless her and rest her soul, she was a good cook, but she didn't know anything about nutrition. And she took cod liver oil capsules. This is back in the 1970s and 80s. She took cod liver oil capsules. And so when we were faced with this problem, and we said, well, we can't give everyone fish, because to consume enough fish, we'd have to give you a serving of fatty fish every single day in order for it to change your circulating levels. And we can't do that. The reason we can't do that is because you'd have to take approximately 7 billion fish out to sea every single day. So that might last 2 days, and then the planet would be ruined. It'd have a huge climatological, ecological, devastating impact, and we wouldn't be so worried about our omega-3 status anymore. It'd be the fact that we killed the planet and the apocalypse was upon us. Also, even if there was enough fish, we don't have the infrastructure to do that. And then secondly, if we get real about it, if we take the fish approach, who does that address? If I'm saying, okay, the solution is you've got to eat more wild, fresh, line-caught, fatty fish every day of the week, who does that satisfy? Who? Yeah, it definitely satisfies them. It satisfies that industry. It satisfies rich people who could afford to eat that way every single day of the week. But most people aren't that well off. And so it's not ecologically valid, it's not sustainable, it's not practical, it's just not even an option. We can't feed enough people to address the deficiency through that. So the next step, which is why we looked at it, is, well, let's look at supplements. And we actually looked at this. We looked at a broad range of research, but we looked at this. And this was the Cochrane Review 2018. Cochrane, for those of you who might not know, is the highest standard of systematic review meta-analyses. They publish high-impact research. And they'd looked at about 112,000 people in 79 trials that met with the standard required for research. And their summary was that there is little to no effect of omega-3 supplements, particularly in the context of cardiovascular disease. So again, we're like, well, we can't give people fish and supplements don't work. And then we looked at this database that I was then able to access about 9 months later, who'd gone off and measured over 1 million people. And we see that, well, this stands up as true. When you directly measure people, you realize that their ratio is coming out at 9.9 to 1. So there's evidence of a change, but the change is meaningless, which is exactly what Cochrane observed, that there is little to no effect. So how do we change it? It's an essential nutrient. So I'm going to pause a moment to explain a little bit further. I've explained 37 trillion cells. I've explained the membrane. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. When something goes wrong, omega-6 plays a part in increasing those inflammatory cytokines so that the immune system responds to what's going on. In order for you to close that and manage that resolution, you need to have omega-3, particularly EPA. The marine-based omega-3s come in 2 principal parts. EPA, the anti-inflammatory, and DHA. Have you heard of DHA before? Yeah? What's the fascinating thing about DHA? It is. How much of the brain? So 60% of your brain is fat, and 20 to 25% of that should be DHA. And we can only derive it through our diet. And so it has a direct impact on cognitive function, emotional stability, mental health. So imagine when there's a deficiency of DHA, and there is. Offers a global burden, 6.3 billion people in the world are living with an omega-3 deficiency. We've measured it, no one's even close to ratio or index. How are you ever going to be empowered to act differently if you can't think differently? If you are not primed for optimal cognitive function, I nearly said something terrible then, I'm going to bring it back. But how are you genuinely going to start to manufacture thought processes that are going to facilitate a meaningful change in your life. So you've got EPA, which is working in an anti-inflammatory capacity, balancing off the AA, the arachidonic acid, which is the omega-6. This has got everything to do with your cellular function and integrity. And then you've got the DHA, which is a constitute part of brain and cognitive function. And I'm sure you all know this, that we all start life as a single cell, which promptly divides and turns into 2 cells, which then goes into 4, into 8, 16, and it proliferates until you reach 37 trillion, which is quite a quick process. And then it's the turnover of those 37 trillion cells for a lifetime that determine who and what you are. The whole code of your health is within each one of those cells. So when you invest in health at a cellular level, what you start to do is write a future you, because every cell is a copy of a previous cell. And so if you had a diet that's overwhelmed in ultra-processed foods with nutritional deficiencies, high saturated fats, when we start to look at other components that can interact, certainly from a chemical point of view, then your cells are direct copies of that. This advances the aging process, leads to dysfunctional cell, which leads to malfunction. When you invest in a cellular status, so you're looking at optimizing the cell membrane, you're creating an active and dynamic cell that nutrients can get in, that waste products can get out, and you've got this active, dynamic, fully functioning cell protected in the mitochondria, which is the power plant at the heart of every single cell. Guess what you get a copy of? And remember, cells are turning over on a daily basis. So what do you start to get copies of? The new cell. You start to rewrite who you're going to be. You start to reshape your health. And it's never too late, and it's never too early to start. And these are fundamental aspects of nutritional health. So, then we had a look at what we can achieve when we use our version of it. And this is not a product presentation, so don't be scared. But I'm just putting it into context that we can actually do this really, really well. We can do this really, really well. And so the goal is to be less than 4-1. Optimal is less than 3-1. And that's the change that we can manufacture in 120 days of consistent daily use of our version of an omega-3 supplement. Like I said, it's not a product presentation, so I want to quickly go back now to the physiology. Why does it take 120 days? Come on, I know there's health people in the room, there's doctors and dentists and everything. Why does it take 120 days?
New blood cells.
Exactly, new blood cells. That's the lifespan of a blood cell. That's what we're trying to change because we're measuring it within the blood, we're measuring it in the whole blood. And you get you've pretty much got a brand new set batch of blood cells every 120, plus or minus 10 days, you get a new batch of blood cells. Blood is an organ. We don't often discuss it as an organ, but it is. And it's obviously an essential and a vital organ because it's the organ that transports oxygen and nutrients to every other organ and system in the body. If we can measure it within the blood, you all know this, it's systemic. If we can measure it in the blood, it's an indication of what's happening everywhere else. Because it's the fluid, it's the life that keeps the system going. And so when we can take you from these kind of values to these kind of values in 120 days, within 4 months, you're better placed now in the terms of your nutritional health. You've addressed the balance. And then you begin from there. You start to rewrite a new version of what health is going to look like going forward. It's a key aspect. What else do we measure over 120 days? Normally retrospectively. It's a common blood test that people go to their doctor for. Blood sugar. We measure that the same way. HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin. We know that sugar in the blood is toxic, and too much of it influences it literally glycates the hemoglobin. This has a huge impact on conditions such as anemia. It desensitizes the insulin response. A loss of glycogen control leads to type 2 diabetes and other metabolic syndromes. Yeah? And again, we measure that retrospectively over the 3 months. So it's an indicator of how you have been structuring your diet the choices you've made over those 3 months. If you're pre-diabetic, how much of it can you reverse as a percentage?
You can reverse it.
Entirely. Exactly. 100% reversibility of pre-diabetes. If you're type 2 diabetes diagnosed and you take the steps through dietary measures, intelligent supplementation, what can you do with regards to your type 2 diabetes status? And if there's any pharmacists in the room, I'd be interested to hear your response to this. What can you do? Let's say you're type 2 diabetic, so your blood sugar values are a certain rate, and you'll probably be given medication and stuff, but we make a whole heap of exercise, activity, dietary changes. We measure that in 3 months' time, and we've got you back beneath the threshold. You've still got type 2 diabetes, because it's surpassed the diagnosable rate, but what can we change? Sorry? Yeah, blood sugar rate, and what does that mean for the individual?
Less drugs.
No drugs. We can get you off drugs altogether. So you can be type 2 diabetic, but never need to take a drug for it again the rest of your life. So you've still got the condition, because it's at the tipping point of a pathology, but you can be drug-free for the rest of your life. Make better dietary choices, be more physically active and exercise. And we know that. The research literature is writ large with that. So if you're pre-diabetic, you can tap the brakes and you can reverse it entirely. You don't need to suffer that fate. If you're type 2 diabetic, you make better choices, you can bring it back down so you're not reliant on drugs. That's always a win. Who would ever want to spend their life on drugs? So you can get back into that category.
Most of people.
Exactly. Especially if you're Ozzy Osbourne. But yeah, you want to get back into that category. And so these insights to blood as an organ and things we can measure are powerful because they empower us to do different things. Remember, when it comes to something like your omega-3 status, which is an essential nutrient, which is functional and active at a cellular level and constitutes brain matter, which leads to cognitive function, you are literally repositioning the person, and every metric of measure with risk prediction over non-communicable disease is set against this category. So when you're at this rate, you actually become the minority of the global population for one simple reason: you're in the lowest risk category with one simple strategy. One simple strategy. So it's powerful, it's measurable, and it's meaningful. And we can change it. And we don't need to strip the oceans of every single last remaining fish. This is the last bit on this point, really. But this relates to the index, which I've mentioned to you. Harrison von Schecke first published the omega-3 index in 2004. It's been built upon ever since. It's been extended. It's been extrapolated. Back then, they did it purely within the context of risk prediction for cardiovascular disease. And now it's applied in the instance of all non-communicable diseases. So, if you are less than 4%, so if the total amount of fat in your body, if omega-3 contributes less than 4%, you are in what we call the pro-inflammatory state, which is often referred to as chronic inflammation, low-level inflammation, systemic inflammation, and you're at the highest risk of the development of a non-communicable disease, specifically cardiovascular disease. If you are 4 to 8%, you're in the moderate risk category. Believe it or not, alarmingly, you probably think, wouldn't you, that most people are here and the extremes are here and the health and fitness fanatics are over here. That's what you'd think, wouldn't you? It's not true. The truth is, over here is most of the world. Most of the health and fitness fanatics are in this range, and the isolated smallest part of the global percentage, less than 2, are over here. And that includes the blue zone areas where people are amazing, and the parts of the world where fatty fish consumption is still high, which is limited and decreasing year on year. So actually our fitness fanatics are in here. Our health people are in here. Most of the world, the big bubble, are down here. But regardless of where you are, what we do consistently, actually 97.8% of the time, takes you from all this and above the 8% threshold and puts you in the anti-inflammatory position. Who do you think take the news the hardest? So when someone knows their diet's not great, they're struggling with various things, and you do a fatty acid profile test, and you say to them, yeah, you're less than 4%, how do you think they take the news?
They probably know.
Yeah, they go, yeah, not surprised. Yeah, can I improve it? What can I do? These people, they argue, they go in denial. No chance. I ran a marathon last week and I only eat coconuts. How can this possibly happen to me? I do everything right. Yeah, but it's really hard to get this bit right. It's really, really hard. And there's so much noise and debate around how much of the fish you need to eat that most people don't get that right either. I was at a scientific conference, an academic scientific conference last year, with two really well-established people in nutrition, but not in omegas. Most of their work was actually in proteomics and looking at proteins. But they decided to comment on this. And they went, you can get enough omega-3 if you have fish once or twice a week. And I was like, you're talking through your backside. You haven't got a clue what you're on about. No one can. Look at the global statistics. People can't achieve it. You'd have to eat it every day, probably once or twice. Nonsense. And then I actually had an instance of an athlete. He's an Olympic athlete, winter sport, and phenomenal, like a machine. And I knew his diet, and he was eating really good quality fatty fish every day. And we did a test. So we did a fatty acid profile test, and we sent it off to the lab, and it came back, and I think he was around about 3.7 to 1 through his diet. And we were like, brilliant, superb, keep it up. And he went, God, no, I am sick of eating fish. If you've got something I can take instead of doing this every single day, I want the stuff that I can take. And interestingly, even with him, he converted across. We thought, yeah, okay, so he's achieving it and maintaining it a different way, but he's not really likely to see any benefit at that stage. But he did. 2 weeks in, he said, I'm sleeping better. He said, I've never had the quality of sleep that I'm getting. Way less muscle soreness. And he actually went from, it was just less than 4 to 1 to just less than 3 to 1. I think he was around about 2.2 to 1. And he said that the difference was profound. And that's even within such a tight range, and technically in the right range to begin with. So it can and does make a difference. But this is the reality. It's not just us. Go and have a look. Have a look at the Harris Index and how this is pitched against health. It's used by health organizations all over the world. For the health and medical practitioners in the room, you're probably well familiar with this already. It's well established and it's meaningful. And the only way we can change it is through dietary modification. We either eat that amount of fish or we supplement. And as you're probably aware, if you know anything about omega-3, there's only 2 indigenous species in the world that can eat algae and digest the nutrients from it direct, the regional part of China and an isolated part of Japan. The rest of us can't. So we can derive and create a supplement off algae. It takes a little bit of work, but we can. And actually the ratios have to be inverted to bring out the same change in our blood, but we can do it. And I think, in fact I know, the future of omega-3 supplementation is the algae. We just need the industry to change and to catch up, economies of scale and capacity, and then we'll no longer have to touch the fish at all. And actually, the aquaculture around algae is really clean and sensitive and considerate, and we can create a sustainable model. But I promise you now, that the key to addressing the omega-3 problem that we have, and it is a problem and it's profound, is through supplementation and not a change in diet. Most people just can't. The vast majority can't manufacture it that way. So, where are we up to? Whew, apparently I've got about 15 minutes to plow through all this. Wish me luck. So, there's a lot of noise in the nutrition space and a lot of people saying a lot of things, and most of it can be a bit misleading. So you'll get those gurus who say good nutrition will block all illness. It's just not true. It's not true. You can be really good. You can eat well, you can exercise and be active, you can optimize your nutritional health, but certain factors are outside of our control. But you will never see a circumstance, you will never see a health circumstance where improving your nutritional health status won't help and won't improve things. I often get into trouble with this when I talk about exercise and movement. And I'm well aware of autoimmune conditions. I've worked with them, fibromyalgia, ME. I've worked with those conditions. I understand them. I'm sympathetic to them. But there is never a circumstance on the planet where a bit of movement, structured movement, doesn't help with quality of life and wellness. When it comes to your overall health status, there is not a circumstance, there is nothing you are dealing with where actually improving your dietary health will improve the situation. Fact. So it's something for us to work on. Back in the day, people were saying that taking vitamin D would stop you getting COVID. Just not true. Yes, there was a huge correlation with the people who had the worst, most severe symptoms and a vitamin D deficiency. I've kind of explained as to why that was earlier on. So yeah, it reduces risk, but it doesn't stop you from getting it. Taking vitamin C will stop you getting cancer. Wow, the next person who says to me they've been recommended to go for intravenous vitamin C because it stops you getting cancer is likely to get slapped across the face. It's just not true. It's just not true. Vitamin C is an essential aspect of your immunology, but it won't stop you. These are things that we can minimize the risk for, of course we can, but there is no magic pill. And taking omega-3 does not boost your immunity. Your immune system is fantastic. Omega-3 will help to enable your immune system. So here are all the facts. Good nutrition helps to prevent non-communicable diseases. It's not as sexy, I understand that. It doesn't sound as good from a marketing point of view, but it's the truth. Taking vitamin D will support the normal function of your immune system. Again, not likely anyone's going to write that on top of a box to sell you something, but it's true. Taking vitamin C will support the normal function of your immune system. Again, omega-6-3 balance optimizes cellular health and plays a part in the normal function of the immune system. Again, non-exciting, but essential and true. And dietary fibers are essential. Now you're probably thinking, Colin, you've crowbarred in dietary fibers. We've been talking about vitamins and minerals, and we've talked about omegas and polyunsaturated fatty acids, and we've talked about immune function. So where are we suddenly getting dietary fibers from? So you tell me, why are dietary fibers essential? For your gut health. Absolute. What is it they do?
Feed the microbiome.
The microbiota. That's what they feed. So they feed the good bacteria that are functioning on your behalf. Remember, 70% of the immune system is within the gut. It's optimized by those bacteria. You are a collection of 37 trillion cells. Do you know approximately how many bacteria are living in you and on you? Way more, 100 trillion, and that's a conservative estimate. More of you is not you. There are more things living in you and on you than are you. Isn't that a fascinating thought? You're just like an ecosystem for bacteria. And when you nurture them, they really will flourish and function on your behalf. They're involved in digestive processes, absorptive processes, and they galvanize immune function. They're integral. If you keep eating the foods that kill them off, i.e. high-processed, ultra-processed foods, there's less of them to fight on your behalf. And there's more of the ones you don't want. This leads to negative cellular proliferation, and then you start to get things like irregular bowel movements, IBS, other gastrointestinal issues, which are becoming more and more prominent as we move forward. And they themselves are the center of the emergence of other types of pathologies, conditions, non-communicable diseases. The gut is the center of the human universe. And a simple strategy is to make sure you get enough dietary fiber. So what foods contain dietary fibers? Plant-based, yeah. Some whole grain, so things like broccoli and spinach and bok choy and lots and lots of good stuff. Porridge oats, lots of good stuff have dietary fibers in them. Do you know what percentage of the daily recommended intake the average person in this country consumes? Just less than 50%. That's where you are. just less than 50% of the recommended daily intake. And you're a small country. Then there are some countries that are even less than 30%. So the way to nurture your immune system, the way to nurture your gut, is to feed the bacteria that want to function on your behalf. So you have to target foods that include them, and target fiber-rich foods, which is looking at a plant-based orientation. But also, olive oil functions as a prebiotic. Omega-3 functions as a prebiotic. They both actually are nutrients for the gut. So not only are they serving at a cellular level and contributing towards that pro-anti-inflammatory resolution cycle, they're actually nurturing your gut. These are essential nutrients. Take care of your gut and you will take care of your health, promise you. So let's whip through things. I'm not going to read slides off to you. Do you know everyone I know is aware of vitamin C? Do you all hear the vitamin C? Yeah? Do you all measure it? Do you know that you've got enough? Confident that you consume enough foods every day that have got it in? The reason why I ask is year on year, when they look at nutritional deficiencies, the one nutrient everyone knows about, vitamin C, consistently appears in the top 5 as a common deficiency. Everyone knows about it. Where can you get vitamin C from? Orange, yeah. Any other examples? Yeah, kiwi, orange, carrots, spinach, berries, yeah, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. So we all know where to get it. And when you ask people, they go, yeah, I know where to get vitamin C.
From garden.
From nature, yeah. And yet it's a common deficiency. And it's integral. It really is a powerful antioxidant. And it's an integral aspect of your immune function, which we covered earlier on. It helps to encourage the production of white blood cells, lymphocytes and phagocytes, protects your body against infection. It helps them to mop up free radicals, so it's detoxifying the system. And also it's a huge aspect with regards to skincare. People are obsessed with skincare. People spend a fortune on lotions and potions and all kinds of stuff. And vitamin C is one of the most proven aspects of improving skin integrity and skincare. And yet it's a really common deficiency. And we get it through the diet. Vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin, that's actually a hormone. It's integral to all immune function, plays a pivotal role in biochemical transfer and information. It's both anti-inflammatory, contributes towards immunological properties. It supports the function of immune cells, T cells and macrophages, protecting against things like viruses and pathogens. Do you all get the common cold in Estonia? Do people get colds and coughs? Yeah? Every year? No? Do most people get it every year? Yeah? That's not natural. No, good. Because it's not normal to get a cold every year. The species wouldn't have made it this long if we did. We'd have died out long ago. But in the modern world, people get a cough and a cold sometimes once a year. I even know people who say they get it 2 or 3 times a year. I've met several people who say, every time the season changes, I get a cold. I go, really? Wow. That's not normal. It's just common. And actually, vitamin D and a lack of it is central to some of these factors. And low levels of it are associated with susceptibility to different types of diseases. Then we get back to omega-3. Omega-3, I promise you now, is a nutrient that once you establish the ratio, once you establish and address the deficiency, you will feel entirely different. You will see changes in your skin, you'll see changes in your respiration, you'll see changes in your sleep quality and pattern, you will see changes in your gut regulation. Literally, it's that integral to the functionality of every single one of your cells, the functionality of the gut, that once you address this, you will never look back. That's it. Are there other ways of doing it? Yes, there are. The other way of achieving a similar outcome is through a high phytonutrient diet. So that's a diet whereby you're going to have a more enriched approach to polyphenols. My best advice is to do both. That's the way to do it, is to address both. And also, when you look at how the body is primed efficiently, its response to omega-3 from a dietary point of view is way more efficient than it is a polyphenol. So when people say, yeah, but you could do it this way, and you go, yeah, you could. There's two ways for me to get to the airport tomorrow. I can hop in a taxi or I can walk. Both ways will get me there, but one's way more efficient, especially when you're carrying 2 suitcases. So think of it in those terms. We've covered a lot, so I'm not going to repeat it, and I'm looking at time, and we're going to give some time for some questions at the end. But we've covered a lot. But that's really a summary of the things that we've discussed today. So it plays an integral role in signaling molecules. So it not only supports the functionality of the immune system, but it's integral to the communication of it. It's a key aspect of what we do. And from now on, I want you to think of yourself as one cell. Just one cell. That's where you started life. And imagine the nutrients that need to go in, the waste products that have to go out, and at the heart of that cell is the power plant, the mitochondria, from which energy is derived. Protect the powerhouse so that you always have a sufficient and abundant amount of energy. Think of that, because that's all you are, times 37 trillion. That's it. I've explained the ratio, but again, as a summary, remember, biology is all about balance, the dynamic art of equilibrium. Too much of anything is never a good thing. And we're trying to balance out the anti-inflammatory with the pro-inflammatory. Too much of one is all go and no stop. Remember, if you're driving your car, you can't hit the brakes and the accelerator at the same time. And if you've been hitting the accelerator, at some point you will need to hit the brakes. You can't function by only having one part of the equation. You have to have it in balance. The optimal ratio of the AA versus the EPA is less than 3:1. If you're less than 4:1, you're in a good place. So you've got to really think about this. And tonight, when you go home, consider your diet, look at what you think is most common, think about how you eat most of the time, and then consider what it is you might need to change. Cellular mitochondrial dysfunction is directly associated with diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and even normal aging. We live in the age where people will pay a fortune for anti-aging remedies. It's huge multi-billion business. And do you know why? Aging is inevitable. We all age if we're lucky enough. How we age is upon us, the choices we make. I don't believe in anti-aging. I think the problem is people around us are aging too quickly. They have advanced aging, and you want people to age at the normal rate, at the biological rate. And so when you get your dietary nutrition right, you reset the clock, so you age at an appropriate rate. And that's a privilege for those of us who get to do it. I'm going to finish with a few comments in general, really, as we approach the time to hand over and let you ask some questions. Too much of the narrative and the conversation around food has focused on quantity. So people's attention has been averted to measuring things, substantiating things, particularly in the context of calories. But you're far more than a system that just burns energy. Your interaction with food is multifaceted, it's complex. Those nutrients drive far more than just energy provision. Your basal metabolic rate, how much energy you cost per day, is pretty much set. And we know this. There are extensive anthropological studies that have looked at the Hamza tribes that have assessed this, hunter-gatherer versus a person living in the city. And the fact is there's only the tiniest variation around our metabolic, our calorific output. Even if you're someone who exercises regularly, we know about metabolic compensation. So the more energy you spend on exercise, the more efficient you are at rest. So you cost less at rest and you have more to spend on exercise. The body balances out. So we need to move the conversation from food and nutrition away from energy, and we need to put it on nutrients. It's all about the quality. I promise you now, if you focus on the quality of your diet and the nutrients that you need to consume, you'll never have to count a calorie again the rest of your life. Some of the fittest, healthiest people I know have no idea how many calories they eat each day. What they know is the quality of the food, the nutrients they derive, and they don't live in perpetual hunger. They're not craving the next thing they need to eat. That's the important part. And we also have to consider the world. I've said this at least twice. 100 years ago, there was 2 billion. Now there's 8 billion people. We have to get more ethical in our considerations of how we do food on a global scale and how we can optimize and address health on a global scale. We have to recognize that intensive industrialized agriculture has come at the cost of nutrients. The soil is lower in nutrients, and by a product of that, and then when we consider things like pesticides and advanced agricultural methods, the food we eat in the average shop doesn't offer us what it is they used to give us. So we have to make the best possible choice we can, the best possible choice we can afford, but we also have to consider supplemental strategies that can fill those gaps and not only make good on what's missing, but actually optimize and give us a better quality of health. We have to look at the ecological validity. 8 billion people, how do we feed them all, and how do we feed them all well? We live in a new era of food, and it's upon us to make different decisions. That's how we do it. It's not a product demonstration, but I do want to mention it. We address it with omega-3, we address it with dietary fibers, and we address it with micronutrients of vitamins and minerals. I classify this as the antidote to the modern diet, but that's something that you might want to discuss with other people around the room. But this is what we work on. For some people it's a business, for me it's a vocation, because I know that through this we can change health on a global scale. And we're doing that, one individual, one cell at a time. That data I showed you before is from our own database of how we are quantifiably changing health on a global scale. We've got a series of publications that are coming out. One of our in-house researchers, Dr. Martina Torreson, will be here tomorrow to discuss some of that research and to share some of those insights. Our first peer review publication will be submitted in 3 weeks' time, and we already have the follow-up 4 papers in the line waiting to go. We are collaborating and network building and research collaborating with some of the biggest institutes on the planet, because it's upon us from an ethical, responsible point of view to put our information, to put our data in the place where it needs to be accessed and literally measurably facilitate better health all across the world. And I'll finish here, because thinking, how we think leads to the actions that we take. And that's the hardest part for most people. They end up what we call pre-contemplative. They become, have you ever heard the phrase, paralysis by analysis? There are so many options that people do nothing because they don't know what to do. Or more often than not, they have a preconceived notion and they can't change the way they think. They can't get out of their own way. And so if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always had. The definition of insanity is to repeat the same process and expect a different outcome. More often than not, you have to be the facilitator of change. One of the reasons I like best about omega-3 is that the change it brings to the DHA, the cognitive function, better places you to think differently, to think more constructively, critically, and then therefore creatively, and do something different. Remember, our beliefs lead to our intention, which is reflected by our behavior, which comes right back round to our control, which establishes new norms and develops a new attitude. And so I hope that in the past few hours that I've been talking about all this, I'll give you some insights on the reality of where things are from a health point of view, contextualize what role nutrition plays and the specifics of some of that, maybe prompted you to think of food and supplementation in a different way and what the priorities might be. But if nothing else, I just hope it stimulates questions that you will seek answers to outside of this, that you can verify objectively from other markers of reliability. And I promise you this, everything you see, if you pursue this through the scientific research and medical route, will emphasize what I've told you. And then I hope all of that brings about those changes up here that will bring about the changes that we need to see out there in the world.